You are listening to Nakedly Examined Music, a podcast about songs and songwriters. My name is Mark Lintonmeyer. My guest for episode 219 is Oliver Wakeman, best known as a keyboard wizard, son of keyboard wizard Rick Wakeman, and he has not shied away from this association. He replaced his father in Yes for about 4 years at the end of the aughts. He's also played some with Strawbs, which was Rick Wakeman's band before Yes. He's played with Starcastle, which is an American, very Yes-inspired prog rock band. But his musical interests span beyond that narrow prog rock sound. You're right now listening to a song, Diving, from Heaven's Isle, his first album, 1997. He subsequently, in the early aughts, released 3 instrumental new age albums. In 2005, he released a hard rock solo album called Mother's Ruin. The band for that had a live album come out in 2008. He also, in the aughts, recorded 3 theatrical concept albums with my previous guest, Clive Nolan. He collaborated with Steve Howe from Yes. He collaborated with guitarist Gordon Giltrap. So I'm going to say that comes to around 11 solo albums. But he's appeared as a keyboardist on over 50 albums. His new album is called Enem Kara, and we're going to discuss Golden Sun in Grey from that record, then look back to the 2013 Ravens and Lullabies album for Is This the Last Song I Write?, then to Mind Over Matter from the 3 Ages of Magic album, 2001, and we'll conclude by listening to a song he wrote for Yes, To the Moment, recorded in 2010, finally released in 2019 on a compilation called From a Page. For more information, please see oliverwakeman.co.uk, and for more about this podcast, see nakedlyexaminedmusic.com or support the effort at patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic. I will have played a little bit of Diving from Heaven's Isle, your first album, 1997. We want to get pretty quickly to the new stuff, but let's talk just for a second about sort of the different strands, that this is the first of 4 sort of new age instrumental albums, Heaven's Isle. I mean, do you even like that term at this point? I don't know what the marketing is.
No, Heaven's Isle is a bit of a mixture between the two. It's a bit over the top piano in places. It's a bit jaunty in places. And in some places, it's quite relaxing. It was the first record I did. It was based on an island off the North Devon coast in England. And I went there for a day trip and it was lovely. And I just came back and started writing music. I did 3 new age sort of albums. I don't sort of count this one as one of those 3 because it wasn't written in that sort of mindset. It was written sort of as a themed album, as it were. But it does have those elements to it in places.
And then how has that been getting the full band together, multiple bands over the years, I should say, being in Yes for a little bit and then releasing these little purely solo projects? I mean, is that sort of just like what you can fit in between things? Of course, the Clive Nolan collaborations, mostly within, a 4-year period?
Yeah, it was. Although we did write for a long period of time before the first record came out. It's kind of weird because I never really think of things as being solo albums or collaborations. I just think of them as albums that I'm doing, and it's just the journey that I take. It was odd when people said about the new record, saying it's been 10 years or 20 years since your last solo album. They're like, what are you talking about? I've done countless records, and I suddenly realized I've been on 60 different records doing sessions and reissues and live albums and Yes and different bands, and you suddenly think, oh yeah, actually just with my own name it's probably been that. But I never really think of it like that. I think one of my difficulties I have is I never stay still. So like you say, Heaven's Isle was sort of a piano-y, relaxing, new agey, a bit frantic type album, and then I went straight off and did rock operas with Clive, and in between that I did prog instrumental, and then I did a new age record, and then I did a full-on rock record, and then I did a bit of Celtic stuff. It's only because I get interested in so many different facets of music. I finish a record and I sort of go, oh, right, what next interests me? And I've sort of very rarely been interested in doing exactly the same thing straight after. I'm not one of those artists that writes 10 songs and then puts a record out, and that's my last 10 songs. I tend not to work like that.
Let's say a little bit about where you are now, which I just saw in your website that this is actually being, or whoever made the website is marketing it as a rock Celtic crossover album. So this vocalist you work with, Hayley Griffiths, I didn't hear the earlier EP that you had with at least one of the same songs on it.
Yeah.
Was she specifically sort of a Celtic quote unquote musician?
Hayley is a remarkable singer. The EP that we just referred to, that was back a while ago. It's when this project first started in its infancy, when I first started writing some music in this sort of vein. The songs that were there, they may have the same titles, but they bear very little resemblance to those because they've just developed over the years into what they deserve to be. But Hayley was recommended to me by somebody because I needed somebody that had a voice that was almost classical at times. I needed somebody that could sing pure. I needed somebody that could sound like a mature voice, and I needed somebody that could rock out a little bit. And Hayley, because she's played in so many rock bands, and she's also one of the lead singers on Riverdance, so she's actually been in that whole environment of being surrounded by Celtic stuff. So I knew that she could handle that comfortably. But because I was never going to just do an album that was just purely Celtic, and it wasn't just going to be sweet vocals and violins and harps, it was going to have electric guitars and there was going to be rock out sections. I needed somebody that could stand up against that barrage of sound when you let the drummer loose on double kick drums and all that nonsense. So I needed somebody that could do that. And she was one of the few people that I knew that I could trust to deliver the songs the way I sort of wanted them delivered. I sort of think it's a Celtic crossover because I'm fascinated by those sort of instruments, violins, Uilleann pipes. I absolutely love Uilleann pipes on music, and whistles and flutes. They're so expressive. And I was determined. Everybody keeps saying to me, oh, what you need to do is a keyboard record. And I was like, right, where you just get all your keyboards out and you solo and you just get a 4-piece band and you just go nuts. And I was like, right, okay. And so when you're doing that, and I thought, at some point, but it's not my driving force at the moment. I wanted to work with these different musicians and different instruments and see how textures worked and how stories could be told. And sometimes I don't want to do it all with keyboards. I took out so many keyboard parts and said, no, let's make that a violin. Let's do this. Let's do that, because it's what the song needs. And the whole record is based around the songs. It's what does the song need to tell the story? And the people on the record, some of them are very Celtic-y. I mean, Troy Pinocchio is renowned for being a wonderful whistle and flute player. He's played with so many people, obviously most recently with Nightwish. But before that, he was, he's a well-in-demand player that's played with so many Celtic bands over the years. And so he adds a certain level of authenticity to the record. It's just a record. It's a record with lots of nice instruments and good musicians playing on it.
The song I had picked on here, because we didn't communicate sufficiently ahead of time, is the massive 8.5-minute closing number, Golden Sun. You want to say a few words about that, then we'll hear it, and then we'll talk much more about it.
But yeah, Golden Sun in Grey is the big epic towards the end of the record, and that is probably the most emotive song I've written in a long time. In fact, it's a song of pure expression. There's a story to it, which I'll tell after we've listened to it, but I'll give the basics of it, which will make sense to the song title. It's Golden Sun in Grey, and it's about a young girl who lives in a fishing port hundreds of years ago. And she has a dalliance with somebody, and the golden sun in grey relates to her sitting on the beach with her golden hair. She lays on the beach, her golden hair is resting on the sand. And when it's moonlight and the sand looks that sort of grey colour, that's where the simile comes from. The golden sun in grey is her gold hair on the sand at night while she's pining for this person.
soul is to the sea. My love's everlasting will bring you back to me. My body is an island awaiting you to land. My eyes are like a tide pool that reach towards your hand. Stay, stay.
So very cinematic song. In fact, the whole beginning, I think of it as a Pink Floyd beginning. We're going to establish the synthesizer wash and really let the soloist have some time to do something. Is there a demo of this that's just you doing all these things? Or did you just, for instance, with that Ilian pipe thing that opens, did you sort of leave space? Pipes will go here. He will do something.
What I generally do is I generally write all the parts on keyboards for people. I sort of know what I want the song to do because I know I have to feel that the development is right and the build is correct. And if I leave too many spaces, you end up surprised with things that you can end up going, wow, that's amazing. Or you can be, oh, that's not really what I was thinking. And then you get into the backwards and forwards and it loses a little bit of its spontaneity. So what I generally do is I give people the part and say, this is the part. And then what really good musicians do is they deliver you back 85% of what you've asked for. And then 15% of it is that magic that only the person that knows their instrument really well can do. You know, they give you those little trills, those little techniques that you can't do on a keyboard, but they would know on the instrument. For example, the violinist, Robert McClung, he sent me I sent him a violin part, and he sent it back to me. So I've done some double stops where I go across two strings because that's what I thought I would do as a violinist if I was on stage playing this. And I was like, brilliant. That's exactly what you're looking for from somebody. So Troy did that with his whistle stuff and the same with Oliver Day with his lutes and mandolins. I'd give him parts and then he would do stuff. And then other times they would give me 2 or 3 takes of something and I'd listen to a part and go, wow, that's amazing. It doesn't fit there. And sometimes you'd end up building whole other sections into a song because the parts that they provided were just so evocative. So that's really how it sort of develops. They start off as one thing. I send it to people, they send me stuff back, and then I get inspired again and then sort of start tweaking a little bit. I often get back from them when they heard the record, they went, I don't even remember doing that bit. It's like, well, you did, but just not there.
At 137, sort of what I labeled as the main guitar riff. So it's kind of been floating around and we're going to solidify into this. So even that, I know you are a guitarist, but like, are you demoing that on guitar or are you just playing that melody on a keyboard and again, giving it to the guitars?
It was probably a mixture of some of it was probably originally on a piano. There were probably piano parts originally. And I sort of thought, actually, this sounds better on a guitar. And so I would say, can you do this on a guitar or a mandolin or a lute or whatever? I wanted Oliver to play it on. But there's some of the guitars, a lot of the guitars that I did are on the album, stayed on the album because it was just like, well, actually that works quite comfortably and they sit there quite nicely. And then other parts, I've just sort of gone to the guitarists like Oliver or David Mark Pearson, or I could have said, this is sort of what I want, but give it your interpretation or how you would play it so that they end up, I say, giving it that little natural guitarist thing, because piano is my main instrument, guitar is my secondary instrument, whereas this is their primary instrument. So you just get that little bit of extra stuff. But I know enough around the guitar to dig my heels in and say, no, that's my bit and I'm keeping that because it works. So I do quite a bit of that. So it's a mixture of everything, really. Some of it's keyboard parts, some of it's guitar parts that they've replaced, some of it's guitar parts that I thought, I'll just keep that. That works perfectly well. But Oliver is so good on the acoustic stuff. Pretty much everything acoustic on the record is Oliver Day because he's just a master at those instruments. He's wonderful.
We play just a little after that, 153. We're going to resolve and then finally bring in the piano. Any thoughts in just constructing this initial soundscape that then will go into, I mean, was it written originally just as a piano song?
Everything starts, when I write, everything starts either on an acoustic guitar or a piano. If it's a song, because I'm a big believer in the song has to work as a standalone piece of music just with the voice and the basic instrument, because that's when you know that the melody is strong and can stand up on its own. Otherwise, you're arranging around a piece of music to make it sound better, whereas arrangements around a piece of music should enhance the song that's already there. It shouldn't sort of try and cover up the fact that the song isn't very interesting or the melody isn't very strong. And that happened earlier on in the record, actually. There was one song on there. Once the instrumentation had built and built and built, I actually completely rewrote the vocal at the last minute, which didn't go down very well with the record company, but I said it had to because everything else had developed so much that suddenly this vocal, which was essentially quite simple, now didn't stand up with the rest of the stuff. So I had to rewrite that. All songs start like that, and I have to make sure that they work. And Golden Sun and Grey was like that as well. But I always knew I wanted it to build. It always had to be a really epic build to this. And then when Hayley came in with just the piano, it almost had to just come back to that basic principle I have of just the voice and the piano. We literally strip it back bare again to show the vulnerability in the voice. Because to talk about the song a little bit, the way that it works is it's this young girl who's in a fishing port. A sailor has come into the port. They've had a dalliance and she thinks it's love forever and he's going to stay and stuff. And he doesn't. He's a sailor, so he goes off on his boat never to return again. And she spends her months that's on the beach just waiting for him to come back. And of course, he never does. So that's why the words in the song are all similes around the ocean. So, my heart is to the ocean as my soul is to the sea. So it's everything around it is around this evocative nature of her relating herself to the ocean, trying to call this person back. So that principle of the song was what inspired me to go through. And as the song goes through, that you realize that this person is pining more and more for this life that she wants that will never exist. And it feels like as you go through the song that she's getting more and more into this desperation of wanting this person to come back. And then right at the end, when you feel that the song has got to an emotive pull of the life is not going to be as it wants, she realizes that she's pregnant. And then she realizes that actually there's a whole future ahead of her. So that's why the very last line of the song is, can you see the sun? Can you see the moon? Can you feel the life inside the womb? So the very last line of it is this person actually realizes that everything in her life that she has been pining for actually now has no meaning. Everything is now the future and this life, and she actually is going to be responsible for this little person. And I like that idea of the change that life can throw at you and the way that things change. And that was really important in this record. Everything is about relationships or interactions between people, good, bad, indifferent. It's that sort of concept across the whole record. And that was really important on this song to actually, every song is about something in so much as this song is about that desperation of feeling alone and then suddenly realizing you've got something to live for. And I felt that was a really good way of finishing the record, to have this sort of emotive, plaintive cry that actually ends up in a really positive note right at the end of the record.
That's funny because I was transcribing these lyrics just from listening to it. And that's the one line that I couldn't quite figure out what was being said because everything else has been symbolic, all this gesturing at the sea, but talking about your empty soul and things like that. But then to have a very literal thing right at the end.
And that was it. It was to suddenly pull the person out of this sort of despair that they had. It was literally like not quite a light bulb going off, but this is a real truth. Everything changes now. It's interesting you said the Pink Floyd bit at the beginning, because the guitarist, Dave Mark Pierce, when I asked him to do the solo at the end, there's a sort of call and response solo where Dave plays a solo and then I come in on guitar with Oliver Day on lap steel. The two of us do that sort of counter line. And then Dave comes back in again and Dave said, "What am I doing here?" And I said, "You have to think of Dave Gilmour on top of the wall in Comfortably Numb." I said, "You've got to have that sort of Dave Gilmour emotive feel. You've got to really wring the neck out of your guitar and make it really sing with almost pain." And he did a fantastic job, gave me exactly what I needed. It was lovely. I said, "Go and watch Floyd. Go and watch the emotion when Dave Gilmour appears at the top of the wall."
These two solo sections, the one that's mostly you and the second that's mostly guitar, with the same structure, and each of them is about a good minute and a half almost.
Yeah.
To really just let things breathe. And we're going to switch to a new key and get back to it. It sort of took me sitting down and trying to recognize when the guitar does it, it's that same progression. It's hard to hear the resonance when the phrases are quite so long, but it does make it so that it doesn't just seem like it's just going on and on. It could go any direction. Like you have this first stay as your heart moves further away. Like I thought that was going to be the chorus, but then that never comes back. Like that's just a little thing between verses, but then it's actually this big solo chunk that gets duplicated. Yeah. Any thoughts about how you structure these things? Like you have this nice 2-minute intro and these 2 long sections just to break up the story there.
The whole record is full of that, because people know me sort of through Yes and the other things that I've done. I've sort of been labeled as a prog musician, and I don't have anything against prog musician, because I'm never really quite sure what that means. Because to people that aren't really into prog music or progressive music or know the scene at all, their perception always is that it's fairies and you're talking about wizards and every song is 30 minutes long and there's a flute solo that lasts half an hour in the middle of it. And it really isn't. Progressive music is so many different things. To me, progressive music is just doing something or things that aren't standard. You just do things that are different and you're experimenting and trying different things. because essentially as a songwriter, I'm a storyteller. I'm trying to tell a story in a music form, and I'm trying to make the music and the arrangements enhance the song and help tell the story of what's going on, whether it's an emotive pull or whether it's a sort of descriptive pull. There's a section in a track called Marble Arch where in my head the characters go to a jazz bar, and so the music goes into a jazz section. You know, I'm trying to tell the story through music and help to tell the story and move it along. And so Golden Sun in Grey was very much, it was an emotive pull. All the instrumentation had to be emotive. So it wouldn't work suddenly making it delve through 12 different chord structures, moving through and adding ninths and 13ths and seeing how complicated we could make it and as fast. It was literally the chord structure was there, defined. It worked very well. It did what I wanted it to do. And there's a lot of layering. There's an awful lot of build around structures rather than just constantly going, all right, what another clever section can I tag in here to make this a long song? It was like, no, we can go around this again, but this time we have to add something else to it that builds it and adds another texture. And there's a lot of that going on in the record, which is something I love doing. And I actually think it's something that does help with repeated listens because it means that there's more to hear. And a couple of people come back to me and said, I listened to it once and thought, oh, it's all right, I've got the measure of it. They said that they listened to it a second time and went, oh, actually, I didn't hear half those solos first time. And then the third time they listened to it, they hear something else. And I like that in music. That's what I love about the music that I listen to. And so I think that's something that was really important on this album, particularly this track.
Well, let me play a little bit of that first solo section. I was trying to remember if anywhere in here you actually went into the portamento, you know. Honestly, hearing some of these songs on this album the first time, like, okay, this is sort of 80s power ballads feel, but then it has, you know, because that's your solo instrument of choice when you're not pianoing. Any thoughts about like when you whip that?
Yeah.
I don't know why that sound should have like a fantasy associations. It's just a sound. It's a nice open.
My guitarist wrote to me the other day, because I sent him a copy of it, Dave, and he wrote to me and he said, this is the most unselfish solo album I've ever heard. He said, you've given so much space to everyone else. And I remember thinking, yeah, I probably did. It was important. And I wanted the keyboards when they came in to really be important and the sound to be the right sound. And the keyboards help tell the story as well. And it's a bit like I described earlier on, because I don't write songs, 10 songs, that's an album, out it goes. Because they sort of sit in buckets for a while. I have a bucket that's an instrumental, bucket that's a piano, bucket that's this. And then I get an album sort of together and I listen to these pieces of music together in their demo form and go, do these work together? Is there a theme that makes these pieces sit together? And then if I feel that there's enough there to work on, I listen to them all again. And then I do the usual thing of going, oh, it's practically done, isn't it? And then I open the song up and start listening to it. And then I take off my keyboard playing hat. I put on my producer's hat. And then I start ripping it apart and writing new bits because I then listen to it with a different perception. And I suppose that's why it's the way it is. So it's where the Moog comes in. For example, the big solo on Here in My Heart, my first really big solo only comes in on track 3 because track 1, it was originally a keyboard solo, but then I decided it was better being a violin. And track 2, because it's a story song, it didn't really have room for a solo as such. So when the solos come in, I like to think people have gone, oh, wow, that's great. That's exactly what I was expecting to hear. But you're not hearing it 30 times in a song. And you're not hearing it on every song. And so I wanted to avoid that thing where somebody listens to a piece and goes, which song am I listening to? Is that the bit from this song or is it track 4? You know, there are some songs that you could listen to by certain artists where you could pick out a section and superglue it into another song and you wouldn't notice the difference because everything has such a familiar sound. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. That's how people have their styles. But for me, it was really important that each song had its own identity. And so the sound choice for the keyboards was really important. So Golden Sun in Grey was important that I knew I was going to have this big emotive guitar thing at the end. And I didn't think that a Moog would have that sort of emotive pull. And I thought I'd end up starting to go, like you say, wiggly, wiggly fast. And I felt that would break the spell of what the song's trying to do. So I felt that a gentle piano solo prior to that would be, a very melodic piano solo would work really nicely because she's still in the slightly honeymoon phase at that point of it could be all right. So it's still light, it's still plaintive. And then you realize as you go through the song, then the emotion is kicking in that this person may never come back and the despair starts to creep in. And that's where the guitar came in. So everything that's been chosen has been chosen to be what the story is trying to tell. So it was very tempting at times. And to be honest, there were certain places where I picked out a move and did a solo. I thought, great, that'll do. And then listening to it back, it's like, do you know what? It's just me playing for the sake of playing. And that wasn't right. It just stood out a mile. Even in places like in the track Lonely, where a keyboard solo suddenly jumps in out of nowhere. That's because of the story. That's because these two characters have gone in different directions. That whole song is about two people agreeing to meet 10 years later in a restaurant. 10 years later, the girl's in the restaurant waiting and the other person isn't there. And that's because they've gone off and become a musician. So the music takes that story. And that's so when the music does go a bit nuts, it's going nuts for a reason. That was my rule on this record. It has to enhance and tell the story, or it doesn't really go in.
I'll admit on first listen, just knowing your instrumental prowess and that as a solo album, you'd probably just want to use that as just a quick thing, that when I would hear a violin part, I was like, wow, that's a really good sample. But no, you played it and then you had someone come in and replace it. Okay.
Yeah, but it was also really important when I was writing violin solos to write it as a violinist would play it. So it was like listening to the instrument. How would a violinist approach this? What pauses would they leave? How would, because a violinist will play across a bar in a different way to, say, a keyboard player will. In the same way, a guitarist can play across a bar differently to how a keyboard player can, because guitarists have that ability to bend a note, hold a note, do those sort of things, which it's harder to do on a keyboard. And so it was really important to, when I was writing these other parts, not just to make them keyboard parts played by another instrument. They had to sound authentic to how those people would play those parts. It was challenging at times, but a lot of fun. And, when I got the parts back and people would come back and say, yeah, that's great. That works fine for me. You'd go, okay, great. And I'm doing it right.
So you feel like even with Ilian pipes, you're familiar enough.
Yeah.
You'd witnessed enough of those that you could pretend to play Ilian pipes on keyboard.
Because I'd worked with Ilian pipes before on the 3 Ages of Magic album. I'd worked closely with a guy who was an Ilian pipe player there, and we talked a lot about the pipes. He was also a whistle player as well, but he also made whistles as well. So he used to have a workshop near where I used to live. So I used to go to his workshop and watch him building the whistles, and he would explain to me how they all worked and the different ranges that they all had. And particularly with the Ilian pipes, in order to write those parts correctly, I bought a Ilian pipe sampler that actually had the drone sounds and everything built into it. So you couldn't just play it on a keyboard like a multiple sampler and just hit chords and do everything. It was completely and utterly a standalone app that only allowed you to play the notes as an Ilian pipe would do in a certain key, which meant that there were only certain notes available to you. So you couldn't play it like a piano. You couldn't play it and think, right, I've got every note in the scale available to me here. You only have certain notes in the scale available to you. And then you have the drones, the two sections of drones that you can change between. And so I had to think really carefully about how was I writing these parts to make sure that they worked for the instrument. And, Troy was great. I sent him the stuff and he came back and he said, it all works. And so it's fine. He said, but what I've done is I've amended it here because this is how I would naturally go to play that part on a pipe. And like I said at the beginning, it's that 85-15 split. You give them 85% of the emotion, the thought, the feeling, the melody that you're trying to get, and then they bring you back the thing that just makes it sound even better.
This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. I'm familiar with the patterns that people can get in when you start comparing your life to other people's. Have I accomplished as much as they have? Do other people fundamentally have it together to a greater degree than I do? They say comparison is the thief of joy. Well, therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. Therapy can help you with positive coping skills, how to set boundaries for what you think it's okay for you to do, what you're willing to put up with. It helps you get out of your own way. So it's not just for people who've experienced major trauma. Anybody can benefit from more self-examination, or more precisely, more constructive self-examination. If you were thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And if you don't like it, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nakedly today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nakedly. Well, let's get the second song out there. Another even longer one that I picked, 10 minutes long. Is this the last song I write from your 2013 album, Ravens and Lullabies, done with guitarist Gordon Gilstrap, and the vocalist is Paul Manzi on this. Any words before we hear it here?
Is the last song I write. That was a really The Ravens and Lullabies record is the one I did with Gordon Giltrap back in 2013, and it was the first record I did after I left Yes. Now, the history behind me and Yes was great. I had a great time for 3 or 4 years, but it finished in a not ideal way for me because Trevor Horn came in to get involved in the record that we were doing, and he had a different direction that I had. He wanted to do some songs that they had worked on back in the drama era. And once they started working on that, that suddenly expanded and expanded. And the area of work that me, Chris, Stephen, Alan and Ben had worked on was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then suddenly, of course, because half the record or 3/4 of the record was now music that Trevor had written with Jeff, the scenario that Jeff came back into the band and I left the band. So I came out of Yes. It was a tough time. It was tough to suddenly have that world stop, that door closed to that environment and that world that I'd lived in for 4 years, very closely. And I'd thrown my all into it. And then I met Gordon and we started to talk about doing a new record. And so I sat down and I'd written a few instrumental pieces that I'd had on the go. We talked about these and played them together. The album was Ravens and Lullaby, so it was half instrumentals and half rock songs. And the concept behind that record was Ravens were the rock songs or the songs with lyrics, and the lullabies were the pieces in between. And essentially each piece of music on that record, which we refer to as the Ravens, were songs about issues or things that were problematic or personal in nature in some form, that I was using lyrics and music to help deal with an issue or a situation. And because I'd left Yes, there was that feeling of rejection or that feeling of not wanted. And then there was this sort of feeling of actually, will I ever write another song again? Can I actually do it? Because when you first start writing songs, anybody that's ever written a song, or they say everybody's got a book inside them, is that you can sit down and if you write your first song, it may not be any good, but you can write a song. Anybody can sit at a piano, put some chords together, sing some melody over the top. They've got a song. Whether it's a good song or a bad song is indifferent, but the principle is that everything is completely new to you. Now, when you've been doing music for many, many years, you are essentially still using the same notes, the same options of melodies that are available to you. And you have to make everything sound different, new, original. But when you think about the number of notes there are on a piano or in an octave to use, and the millions of songs that there are out there, it's quite remarkable, really. But as a musician, you always sort of write a song and you go, oh, what a great song, that's really good. And then you sit down and go, how on earth am I ever going to come up with something like that again? And so, is this the last song I write? Was a little bit about that feeling of, is that the last time I'm going to stand on stage? Is this the last time I'm ever going to do this as a job? Is that the last time I'm ever going to feel like that of standing with a crowd clapping? Is this the last time I'm ever going to have that moment where you write something and just get that feeling of euphoria that you've just captured something that was like a shooting star? You just go, wow, that was a great idea. And so that was the principle behind that song. And I remember when I finished writing, it was the last piece I wrote. And then I remember thinking, Gordon said to me, I've got to finish the record. And I was thinking, I hope this isn't true and this is the last one, because then I'm scuppered. We're never going to finish the record.
Is that it? Has my time come? Have I reached the end of the road? Does no one need to hear me anymore? Is that it? Will no one call my name? Has it been and gone, this fleeting thing called fame? Is this the last time that a melody will strike? Is this the last song that I will ever write? Is this the last time that I will mean a thing? Is this the last song that I'll sing? Does no one need me to sign for them anymore? Is it all still and quiet outside the stage door? Is this the last time that the melody will strike? Is this the last song that I will ever write? Is this the last time that I will mean a thing? Is this the last song that I will ever sing? Is this the last time that I will get to see a sea of faces staring back at me? or should I try again? And let the lullabies and ravens be my friends. Is this the last time that a melody will strike? Is this the last song that I will ever write? Is this the last time that I will mean a thing? Is this the last song that I'll sing?
So we start out with another, actually, this is only 30 seconds of intro. It's not a whole piece before we get into it. Yeah, any thoughts in these very breathy, open, I guess if you're starting with his guitar sound is not going to change that much, right? So are you picking sort of a palette that will, whether it's the nice piano or these really very open tones?
Yeah, it was essentially because Gordon is such a good acoustic guitar player. And he plays a lot of steel string guitar. He's a phenomenal player. He doesn't play classical very much, but I knew he was a great classical player. And I absolutely love the sound of nylon string classical guitar over string pads, over a synth pad. I think the two work so beautifully together. I never really spent much time doing it, and I hadn't really done it a lot. I knew it was what I wanted for this song because it had that sort of feeling. It created that almost desolation of just something lost in a big desolate place. So it fitted completely with the idea of the song. And so that's really where it came from. And I knew that it needed to showcase or show off Gordon. And Gordon was like, well, I haven't done classical guitar for a while. It's like, no, you can do it. Just sit down. I'll send you the parts. Just sit and send me melody ideas across. And he sent me all these different parts. And I remember he sent me like 4 or 5 things of like 2 or 3 minutes of him noodling on each one. I pretty much listened to the first or the second one and thought, that's great. There isn't a note I would change on that. And I don't think I ever listened to the others. It was just like, no, you've got it. You've got it. You've caught it straight away. Anything else you do. You know what it's like sometimes when you do something, the inspiration is actually more important or better than the refined version that you do. It was that scenario with those. He just caught it straight off the bat.
Well, and that's a great, not feeling just because there are 20 takes to sift through that you actually have to sift through them. You just find one that you actually like. That's my approach. I was just discussing someone do menus at a restaurant. I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm going until something.
Yeah. You could be forever searching. You have to draw a line somewhere and go, what is it I'm trying to find? And then when you find it, it's like, well, that's it. That's what I'm looking for.
So how does this apply to your patch searching? Are you approaching a new song? I'm going to find a new sound. Do you spend evenings just going through sounds and making notes of like, this would be a good future so that you could quickly get to it?
Yeah. Some keyboards I know intimately. For example, in my rig at the moment, I still use a Roland XP30, which I bought 20 years ago. And I loved it so much, I bought a second one so that I would have one that I could take on tour and still have one at home for writing with, because it had some wonderful sounds on it. The sounds cut through. And I knew it intimately. I knew it inside and out. So if I ever needed to find something, I didn't have to lose that inspiration, because there's nothing worse when you've got an idea for a song and suddenly you're going, oh, I need a horn. You forget where you are. And so I needed to have this sort of a couple of instruments around me that I knew really well, that I could just get to the rough sound of what I needed. And a bit like that with a Korg Triton. I've got one of those and I have the same thing. And I've got it's hidden at the back there, but I've got a Cronus at the back, which I'm slowly trying to do the same with. I'm trying to, every now and then I'll just sit and play with it for a couple of hours and just find a sound and just play with it for a while and make a quick note and go, this was a good blah, blah, blah sound. Because otherwise you can lose your whole life just searching through sounds. And also, I'm not really a keyboard programming type of guy. I mean, I've got a Moog, a little fatty Moog, which I like playing around with. But my keyboard tech is the sort of guy that could sit there for a day and work on sine waves and adjusting them and resonators and oscillators until he comes up with something unique. And I don't have that patience. I want to sit down there, press the keys, and that's what inspires me. But, that's what makes different keyboard players different, I guess.
Let me play about 232 in, where this was the only place that if it wasn't you doing it, I would assume it was programmed. There's a sort of a eighth note.
Does no one need me to sign for them anymore. Is it all still?
We've added this 16th over just as a really background thing. And even just how then when you move into the next section, I wasn't sure in that following chorus, like, is that still there or is it really just low? Because it just fits in really nicely.
Yeah, it's probably still there. It's probably just gone much, much quieter at that part. I'd forgotten about that part, actually. Yeah. But yeah, I never use sequences for things like that. It's always played because I had this rule when I was younger. And I think it's one of the things that pushed me into becoming a piano player or a keyboard player of a certain technical ability, was that I decided very young that I didn't want to write things that I couldn't play live. Now, I appreciate there's some songs that you can't replicate perfectly live because there might be 3 or 4 keyboards going off at the same time and you only got 2 hands. And some parts are impossible to play with 2 hands. So you can't do that. So I always knew that there was going to be limitations, but I never wanted to be limited on playing a piece of music because I couldn't actually play the part. So that was always really important to me. And I've always sort of stuck to that. It's always been, and it may take a few goes to get something, but it's always been doggedly, no, I'm going to do that. And I did a headline show at a festival last month. I did curse myself a couple of times when I had to learn some solos because it was like, oh, come on, why can't you just do something easier? Just because it was like, you get to the next one, you suddenly realize, why did I do fingering like that? Or why did I know why I did it because I was bored and I wanted to see if I could make it do something different or find a different way of doing something. But then when you've suddenly got to play it live, but it's a challenge and it's good fun and it's what makes music fun. So yeah, it is interesting, but I do like playing stuff like that. But it has to fit with the song. Again, it needed that to start raising a little bit of the speed in the song because we had it quite quiet up till that point. And then we just needed to inject a little bit of pace, even if it was just subtly.
We haven't talked about yet how you're relating to these now 2 singers. Are there demos, I assume, somewhere where you're squawking these out, or are you playing the melodies that they're supposed to sing on keyboard?
No, I sing them all. Every song I sing the demos to somebody at some point, and then somebody else may have done a demo of it again, which I then used. That's Paul Manzi singing, who is the singer with the Suite now. Paul and I have been friends for many years. Paul damaged his voice many, many years ago, and then he decided to try and get back into the music industry. And somebody connected me and him together back in about 2003, I think it was, 2003, 2004. We met at a rehearsal here, band on the same day, and he sang brilliantly, and it never even turned into an audition. It was literally like he turned up, the bass player turned up, we sat down, we played songs, and that was the band. And then Paul and I became great friends and have remained great friends over the years. He was here a few months ago, even though we don't work as much together anymore. I just knew that he was such a powerful and such a good singer that he would always do justice to whatever I presented to him. But the advantage that we have is that the timbre of our voice and the range of our voices is the same. That means, not comparing myself to Paul's ability to sing by any measure, but if you imagine I can sing on a scale between, in the range of keys, I can sing between, 4 and 7. Paul can do 1 to 10, but we both have that core part in the center. So when I sing a song and I struggle to hit a note, I know that Paul will be able to reach that note. But I also know that the basic core of the song that I'm singing, where I can sing in the range that I feel comfortable in, I know he's going to sit in that point quite well and go, yeah, this feels comfortable to me. So he doesn't have to go, could you take it up a tone, or can we take this one down by a semi? He's able to drop a much better version of what I've come up with. And that really helps with Paul. And that's always made it really easy to work with Paul, because I've never had to, every song that we've worked on together live or in the studio, I don't think we've ever had to change a key or rethink an area at all, which is quite remarkable, really.
For Haley, then, is it different? I have a female singer in my band that I sometimes write for, and I just have to write it so I can sing it and then sit down with her and like, what key should this actually be in? And then rewrite all the chords and then introduce to all the other musicians. But it sounds like, you have the complete demo and then you get the singer in. So how are you anticipating? You just sort of know her range in advance, or what?
I kind of knew her range in advance, and there was a couple of places where she went, that's a struggle for me. And so I would go, okay, let me think about it. And then maybe, there's a traditional way. Sometimes I would rewrite a section for her to sing comfortably, and I'd go, actually, this works much better because it feels more in tune with her voice and it fits nicer. And then other sections where she'd say, I don't think I can do that. And I'd say, I think you can. And she'd go, I'll send you something, but I don't think I'm going to do it. And she would sing it and it would be brilliant. And what was really nice about working with Hayley, and somebody wrote a comment about the record, they got the record and they listened to it. And they said it was really nice to hear Hayley's voice really being used, not pushing her out of her comfort zone, but it was utilizing the vocal range that she had to its extremes and in all the places that she maybe didn't get asked to use as much. And I think that's probably the best way of describing how it worked with Hayley. So there's some areas that she felt like, don't think I can go there. And it's like, well, try it and let's have a listen and see what it sounds like. And she would do it and she would go, oh, wow, that actually sounds okay, doesn't it? And I think that's it sometimes with things, because people do get caught in little comfort zones of where they feel they're comfortable. I mean, I do as a keyboard player. You probably do as a musician as well. You get to areas and you go, I know what I'm doing here. I'll just do that again because it feels comfortable. And then you get to the point you just go, no, actually, I'm going to push it a bit further. I'm going to try something different, or I'll experiment, or I'll do something. And I think it's the same when you're working with other musicians. You can always push them a bit and see what comes up with it, because, musicians are, nobody likes to feel they can't do something, do they? As a musician, you like to at least try and get something, or get something you feel proud of and pleased with. And everybody at the end of the day is trying to achieve the same thing. You're trying to release something that is the best it can be. And people want to be a part of that, knowing that they did the best they can with it. And I do the same whenever I'm doing a session for somebody. They send me something and I can just knock something out that's just what I always do. But I never do that. I sit down and go, right, what's the best I can do to add to this piece of music? It's always been the way I've worked. And I've been fortunate that most people still want to keep working with me. So I can't be annoying them too much. They can't hate me that much for it.
Well, it's still really interesting that, so if you're writing for Hayley and you're using her full range, then clearly you're not just writing with your voice. That often singers, the reason that they fall into these patterns is because they're writing not with their sort of keyboard brain or, abstract composer brain, but they're actually writing as singers, and so are limited but yet you're writing these melodies that clearly you can't. I mean, was she pretty much just an octave above you, so you could more or less write in your singing range and know that she would just be able to hit it?
There were a couple of apologetic emails I wrote to Hayley where it's like, I'm afraid you're just going to have to put up with my guide vocal here, because it would be slightly screechy or falsetto or something, but it was the only way I could get across what I needed, because that's why it's not me singing it, it's why it's Hayley singing it. But I had to get it right so that the melody was interesting enough to me, even with me singing it badly. So if I could listen to a piece of music and go, okay, you're not singing it very well, but I can hear what it's trying to do, and that is definitely the right direction for the piece of music. I knew that once Hayley delivered me the part, it was going to be infinitely better, but it would still be doing what I wanted it to do, rather than trusting to that, oh, here's some basic piano notes, can you sing a melody around this? Because it wouldn't have the same feel for me. I didn't have any problems with Hayley at all. I mean, some of the recordings she did remotely, some of those songs worked fine because they fitted really well. She was really comfortable with it. It all made sense. It came out. And there were some other songs where she was coming back and going, I've got a question about this, or I'm not sure about this, and how do we approach this one? It's like, okay, well, let's go to the studio. Let's go and do the bit where we stand next to each other in a studio and you sing something and we see how it works and we try different approaches to things. And I think that's part of the production or the producer's hat that you put on, is you're always trying to find the right way to get the best out of somebody. And sometimes it can be you got to meet up face to face and just sit there and play through stuff and work it through. And other times, some people like to be left alone to work out their part on their own and then provide it back. And I think that comes down to the production of a record as well. You're always trying to find the right way to make the person feel most comfortable to get what you're looking for.
So as compositions, these two tunes, that the second one you're saying it's from a more personal point of view, this could be the kind of thing that if you felt, in fact, it seems like a lot of singers just like, so Steve Hackett, right, started out using, I need to get the guy from Kansas, I need to get Richie Havens, I need to get these amazing singers, but eventually just felt self-confident enough. And even in the early stuff, like, well, this song is quirky enough or whatever that I can sing it myself. And then just eventually like, oh, I just realized I was the singer I was looking for. And even Steve Howe's stuff, much more vocally challenged, but yet it's some of the stuff like, oh, he just does it himself. Have you yielded to that temptation anywhere in your catalog, or you just, I mean, I know you're doing harmonies, you're showing yourself on the video, singing along with Hayley. So.
Certain sections I was comfortable with, like that Miss You Now thing is perfectly comfortable with that. There's backing vocals in 1,000 Autumns, which were 3-part harmonies going on there. And I did all of those, and I wrote all the harmony parts for the other guys in the band to sing as well. So I'm comfortable enough doing all that stuff. And when we play live, I can do the backup lines or the counter lines and things. On the Dark Fables record, which was the third record that Clive and I were working on that never got finished, we did release it as sort of unfinished tracks that we finished up as a part of the Tales by Gaslight box set, and then it had a single release of its own. There was one track in there where I'd sung the original version of a track called A Man Called Sherlock, which was based on Sherlock Holmes. And right up until the day before the final mix and master, it was me singing it. And I chickened out at the last minute and then phoned up Paul Manzi and said, Paul, can you sing it?
The most low pressure release that you've ever had.
I know.
The bonus disc.
I know, and I still couldn't bring myself to do it. There are a couple of tracks that I've written where my voice does suit it perfectly well. And so maybe one day, they might not be songs that come out on a record. So maybe on a demo disc or something like that, they'll appear. It's only that there's people that do it better than me.
Well, it sounds like the phrasing on this was at least you, that Paul is just, that when you're leaving these pauses, that this very sort of poetic delivery is just you. I guess, are you in a fundamentally different mode than writing Golden Sun and Gray or one of these story songs that, in fact, I sort of can't completely get my mind around? You're sitting down at the piano and a melody comes to you, and instead of just singing about something that you feel, where in the process does it, hey, I think I need to have a story about a woman pining for her lost love? I mean, is it just that the thing that you're playing on piano is sort of evoking a folk, and this is a rock Celtic crossover album, so that it has these folk traditions built into it so that you can write about longing about the sea, that if you're writing a personal song, you'd probably not use those words.
No, I think it comes from that slightly weird thing. Do you remember John Lennon used to say there's the bit in the Get Back documentary, and I'd read a lot of Beatles books before, where they would put, famously, Paul McCartney used scrambled eggs instead of yesterday because he couldn't think of the word that was going to make the word up. He had the rest of it, but he didn't have it, so he used the word scrambled eggs because it had the right tone. So what I tend to do is when I'm writing, I'll just be singing anything that comes into my head. And generally a phrase comes into mind or something just drops in that I sort of go, oh, that was it. Where did that come from? And something will then spark something in me and it will make me go, oh, okay, why did that come? What am I trying to do? And sometimes it will be an emotive thing. For the last song I write, I remember very clearly, I just sat there with the pads and I remember just singing that line, is that it? I just sort of wrote, is that it? And I thought, well, that's quite nice. Is that it? That's quite. Then the line going, has my time gone? If you just sing it like that, it sounds really dull. But when you get those pauses and that intonation and the swell of the music underneath, I suddenly thought, oh, okay, what am I trying to do here? Then you suddenly find that the lyrics starts to reveal itself. It's almost a bit like a scratch card. You sort of scratch and another part comes through. And then you suddenly realize that it's almost like your subconscious is trying to point you in the direction of what it wants to do. And it's slowly revealing it to you and you slowly build these stories up. Those emotive things, I don't sit down and say, right, I want to write a song today about, is this the last song I write? I don't do that. But sometimes as well, on the other side of the coin, something like Marble Arch was a short story I wrote when I was in my late teens, early 20s. Just a short story I had as an idea. And I'd always wanted to put it to music. And I tried to do it maybe 3 or 4 times and realized every time I tried to do it, I didn't have the musical knowledge or the arrangement knowledge to do it justice. It never worked. And it always ended up being an abandoned piece of music. And it was only when I came to this record that it suddenly, I was having a play again with it and it all fell into place. It found its home. And I think that's what it is with pieces of music. They find their right times. But lyrics are like that. It's an odd thing. I remember there's a track called The Agent that I wrote that's on the album Mother's Ruin. And that piece of music was about a gig that I'd been booked to do. And we found out through someone else just how much the agent was taking. The agent was taking practically everything and the band were getting paid absolutely nothing, and it was rather unscrupulous. And I remember being really angry about this and we pulled out from the gig, the only show I think I've ever pulled out of. And I was sort of really incensed about this. And it was like, so I started writing this piece of music called The Agent about somebody that was just stealing a musician's soul. And I ended up writing this. And I remember my wife said to me, "Come on, it's bedtime. You've got to go to bed now. It's getting late." And I said, "I've just got this idea for a lyric." And I started writing this thing. And then she came to the room about an hour later and there's this like 4 reams of paper. And I just literally had just snapped out this massive great rant of, and it all stayed in the record. It ended up being this sort of like an 8-verse rant in the middle of the song, but it works really well because the music is constantly building behind it. And I think that's it with music. Sometimes lyrics are really hard and they take a while to reveal themselves or to refine and to get the story right. And other times they just come really quickly, like a splurge of, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a subconscious release of everything that you want to say. And sometimes you'll find little sections of music that you've had for a while that have never found a home, and you suddenly go, actually, that really tells what I'm trying to do at the moment is that. And I have a folder full of lyric ideas and thoughts that I've had. And other times I'll be walking somewhere and I'll just pick up the phone and start writing. There's a track called Credit Carnival, which is on Ravens and Lullabies. And that is about a man in a casino spending money he doesn't have. And that came from when I was on tour with Yes, and it got to the evening after one of the shows that we'd done in a casino. And I was just walking around looking at everything, and I just started writing the lyrics into my phone, thinking, oh, yeah, there could be a bloke there. It could be, I don't know his history, but maybe he's got a wife at home and she doesn't know where he is. She thinks he's at work. And I started writing these whole lyrical ideas, and it suddenly ended up this whole story. And when it came to the Ravens and Lullabies record, I was just sort of going through my phone and my voice recordings and to see what ideas I'd come with. And I found this whole lyric there, and it's like, oh, wow, that's a whole song there. It's really weird. I don't really have a formula as to how I do it. They come from so many different ways of writing, depending on where the inspiration comes from. And I think that's one of the things that I quite like about songwriting, is that it comes from so many different places. I don't know whether you've done the same thing, but in the 15 years ago, before we all had phones and all these amazing apps on it, I used to be driving along and I'd phone up my home phone answer machine and sing to it, because you'd come up with an idea while you were driving and you just phone the home phone and say, please leave your message after the beep. And I had so many recordings of getting home and suddenly having all these little musical ideas on the phone, because you just needed to try and get these ideas down because they'd come out of nowhere. A bit different to now, where you can just pick up your phone and say, hey, Siri, record my album for me.
Right. I had a recording Walkman was my thing. I'm not going to make you walk through all the nuances of the arrangement of this 10-minute song. We've been doing this interview for a long time, but I got to play the bridge.
I'm wishing in a nightmare, I'm praying through the pain. Lullabies are playing softly, fighting for the warming mind.
With a song this long, it's got to have some build, and you've had the standing alone on a stage, pausing, and now it's going to go somewhere. Yeah, any thought about, though, how you're choosing what goes where, the fact that it does this twice, and you've got your breaks for the solo, you have a 6/8 part after this. Yeah, any memories of deciding how to arrange this?
Yeah, because I remember thinking, because those bits came in quite late into the song, they're almost like the choruses in an odd sort of way, even though a 10-minute song doesn't really have a chorus, but it's because you'd sort of think that, is this the last song? Is this the last time a melody will strike? Those lines would be the chorus, but they're not. They're just a refrain in the verses. I got to this point where I'd sort of had this despair bit of, is this the last time that a melody will strike? Is it the last song that I will ever write? Is it the last time that I will get to see a sea of faces staring back at me? There's this imagery of being on a stage. And I thought, well, I can't just do this for 10 minutes of, is this the last time I'll ever see a raccoon? Is this the last time I'll ever see, a boat? You can't just keep hammering the point home. You've got to go somewhere with the song. And because the album was this Ravens and Lullabies thing, it was this element of the lullabies with the cleansing part of the album. So you're getting your cathartic opinions out, or releasing some pressure or tension or something that was bugging you. And then you had this cathartic bit of music. And so I sort of felt that I needed this area in the song where it was a bit like a push and pull, where you had, your brain was almost being overtaken, a bit like the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other shoulder. It was like this bit of this, I'm wishing in a nightmare, I'm praying through the pain, and you have this sort of anger. And then the lullabies are playing softly, fighting for the room in my brain. And it was this idea that you've got two ways that you can go in life when things treat you badly, is you can get angry, get despair. Anger can take over everything and change the way that you are, and you can become a bitter person. Or you actually try and calm it down and take a different approach to life and be reflective and go, okay, something happened to me in my life that wasn't the greatest thing ever. It had good parts and bad parts. What can I learn from that? What can I take with me to help make the next part of my life interesting, or so I can learn from these situations so that in the future they don't become as painful? And so that's what that section was really all about. It was like that conflict of trying to decide what sort of person you wanted to be after having gone through this experience.
Well, let's move to the third one. I wanted to look at something earlier in your career from the 3 Ages of Magic album, 2001. Mind Over Matter, I picked the second song, so not the biggest epic. It's only a 4-minute song, but there was some nice punch to it and what people might think as, one of the guys in Yes, or it has that Moog, the fast soloing in it, plus actual Steve Howe playing the guitar lines, right?
Yeah.
Or are you doing some of them?
No, that's all Steve. That's all Steve on that.
Yeah,
one.
any thoughts about, you want to say a little about where you were at with this album and this song just before we hear it?
The whole 3 Ages album was a great album to work on. I used to live quite close to Steve Howe when we both lived in North Devon. He used to invite me over to his house quite regularly, and we'd known each other, obviously, from when I was tiny. He knew me from Dad being in Yes, but I really got to know him on the ABWH tour. I went over on the American tour and hung out with the band for a while. I got to know Steve quite well there. And then I didn't see him for years. And then oddly enough, I bumped into him on a train station platform when I was hitchhiking. I'd got a train to a certain point and then couldn't get any further to go and see my mum. And I got off the train and thought, right, I'm going to have to hitchhike now for another couple of hours. And Steve Howe stood on the station platform picking up his son. And I just went over to him and said, "Hi, Steve, it's Oliver." And he was like, "Oh, hello." And he gave me a lift, and then he said, "You must come over." And we started this sort of friendship of going over, and we'd just sit and talk about music, and he'd tell me about Yes, and he'd play me his new solo record. And then he said to me, you must play me some of your music ideas and things. So I gave him a copy of my first album, which had been out by then. I was working on the second album, Jabberwocky, and that had Peter Banks on it. So I was playing him some of the stuff that Peter Banks had come up with. I always remember, a lot of people sort of said that Steve and Peter Banks had this massive rivalry and blah, blah, blah. But I remember playing him Peter Banks' guitar stuff off of Jabberwocky, and he was like, "Is that Peter?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's good. It's really good stuff." He was very complimentary about the stuff that Peter was doing later in his career. Then he got to the point where he did say to me one day, he said, "Oh, maybe we should do a record together." And I said, "Well, I'd love to." And then he said, and he said, Yes might look for a keyboard player at some point. He said, "Would you ever be interested?" This was around the time of The Ladder when they got Igor in. So I was sort of put up for the role around that time. And Igor, because John was very keen on using Igor on that tour. So Steve said to me, he said, "Well, let's work on a record together." And I said, "Okay, great." And then it turned out that he had a lot more commitments and couldn't find the time to do it. So then he would say to me, "Well, just bring your song ideas up and maybe I can get involved in helping advise you on songs, and maybe I'll play guitar on a track or two." And that's really what happened. And I'd go to his house and I'd take a tape of songs and ideas, and he'd constantly be picking up a guitar and playing bits and sending me postcards that said, "Listen to this track the other day. This is really good. Maybe we should do this 3 times, 2 times." And so we ended up working really, really closely on the record together. And it was really good fun. But Mind Over Matter, to get to that track, it was, like you say, it's one of those tracks. It's a bit widdly, and its demo title was Widdly. That was its title before it became Mind Over Matter, because it had that widdly bit at the top. And it was like, and I think that Mind Over Matter thing it was like that. Blimey, I thought, God, can I actually do that? Can I actually play it that fast? Can I actually make it all work? And that's where the whole principle of Mind Over Matter came from, was actually being able to. And that was around the time that I said to you that I was writing songs going, I'm not going to write a song unless I can play it. It's that principle. But I was also playing in a blues band at the time. It's where I did a lot of my formative training, was playing in blues bands and house bands and function bands and playing all over the place. So, that principle as a young musician is you play everywhere and anywhere and play with as many different people and as many different styles of music as you humanly can, so that you can learn, how to be on stage, how to interact with other musicians. I remember being in blues bands and house bands where you just literally turn up on the night and jump up on stage, and somebody will turn around to you and say, "Is this track's in A?" And it might be a straight blues, in which case you follow it around, and other times you might be playing something that's more chordally complicated. And so I had to learn very quickly, standing on a stage, looking at the neck of the bass guitar, thinking, okay, so what notes is he playing there? And I'll stay quiet for the first way through, just let the song build, watch him. Okay, it's an A. Where's he gone through that? It's B flat. All right, where's he going now? Okay, it's an F and a G. Okay. And you sort of learn it, and then you find your way into the piece of music, and you're watching people's hands and learning how to read other musicians and what they're doing. And I found that fascinating. And because of that, that was where the Mind Over Matter piece has got a lot of that sort of syncopated stuff of everybody in the band working together. And so that was something that I really wanted to experiment with and try in that song as well as it just being a sort of flashy showpiece thing. It has to have that sort of feeling of a group of musicians all working together rather than just people backing somebody up, because I'd really enjoyed that, playing live with these musicians I'd never met before. You had to jump straight into that ability to, if you're not soloing, you are part of the support that is helping somebody else deliver their part of the song. And so I wanted to portray that in that song as well. And again, that was quite a long time ago, that song. So I can't remember exactly what song I was trying to mimic at the time, but it was that feeling. It was that feeling of actually saying, right, we need to make everything sync together rather than it just being a bunch of flat chords and everybody just playing through.
Dr. Forrest, dial 118, please. Dr. Forrest, please dial 118.
A lot of playing in terms of the build, like we're actually going to start really low.
I just remembered that was a D50, that opening part, it just suddenly jumped back into me. I remember I got a hold of a D50 and I also got hold of a Korg NS5, I think it was. It was a keyboard that came out at the time and it had some great sounds on it. And I remember that was one of those times. That was one of those times in life where I didn't have a lot of keyboards and, you know, you worked them to death. You used every available sound that you could find and every experiment you could do. So I did know those keyboards rather well. And I remember that song now thinking, yeah, I've got to use this. And yeah, I remember the D50 was a bit of a revelation because it'd been one of those keyboards that was so famous in the 80s. But because in the 80s I was listening to a lot of Dad's stuff and prog stuff, I was really into hammered organs and Moogs and things. So it was only when I got to the 90s that I'm always sort of like a decade behind whatever instruments turned up. It's probably in 10 years' time I'll be playing with Korg Chaos pads and things.
And the stops where the guitar comes in, again, so did you just have this as more or less a complete piece, but you had left some space for the Steve parts?
So with Steve, it was pretty much I would write all the songs I wrote, and then I would go to Steve and say, what do you think? Or he would be suggesting as I was writing it or as I was playing him the demo. So it wasn't really a case of I'd finish the song and send it to Steve and say, add your guitars. I would be playing him ideas and he'd say, okay, well, if you stop there, we can put something in and I can think about that and leave me those spaces then. And then there were some sections on that record where, like this big track at the end called Hybrisail, where there's like a minute and a half of just Steve playing Spanish guitar. And I wrote all that on a keyboard. I remember just sitting down and playing the guitar on the keyboard as I would imagine a guitarist to play it. It was before I could play guitar to be able to demonstrate what I wanted. And I remember we went to the studio, a barn in the middle of the countryside, and Steve turned up with the guitar, set a couple of microphones around him, and he played it, and it was just amazing because Steve had been so involved in the record, he needed a little showcase section as well that was just pure Steve. It was great. So I sort of came up with these ideas, and then Steve just went into what Steve does well, which is his wonderful sort of rock, jazz, instrumental improvisation world, and it was wonderful. He did it all in like 2 or 3 takes. It was fantastic.
Let me play just a little bit of about a minute 45 in. We slow down and then have this sort of, yes, maybe this is where the group is going into the club. Let's hear.
Dr. Forrest, dial 118, please. Dr. Forrest, please dial 118.
Yeah, any thoughts that this has been high wizard for the rest of the song, and now we're going to go into this. I mean, yes, it's rhythmically interesting. It's not, but I had put adding in the piano in that way, it sounds like a little loungy or something compared to what was going before.
I think it was that feeling that just experimenting and trying different things at that point. I wanted to get the piece of music interesting and not just become a keyboard fest of just another then fast part, because otherwise the piece of music doesn't go anywhere. And I like the idea. I had this melody idea of this. I think it comes to the da 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 da. And I had this melody over just some flat chords and stuff, and it was just sounded bland. But once it worked with this sort of counter rhythm going on, it worked really nicely. A lot of that experience came from just playing in those house bands and function bands where you find a groove. They're played in blues bands, and we used to play a lot of old 50s and 60s blues pieces where you'd have the keyboards and guitars doubling up and playing these sort of rhythm bits. And I really enjoyed all that. I loved that feeling when 2 or 3 instruments all play the same thing together or harmonize together, but they're so tight. And I loved that idea of, because this is pre-Pro Tools. This probably was around Pro Tools times, but it was early MIDI times. And you didn't have the opportunity to go in and pull the bass perfectly into line and get the drummer perfectly in line. You had to play it live to a click, but you had to be bang on to get that sort of feeling of accuracy. And that was one of the things I love about playing live is you've got that eye contact. You see the other person, you can anticipate where they're going to hit, and you work together and get those pushes and pulls exactly right. I suppose I wanted to recreate that sort of bit on a record. That was really what I was trying to go for there. If I remember correctly, I do remember the bass player hating me vaguely for it because he was going, what are we doing here? Is this a push or a pull? I don't know whether you feel the same thing, but when you write something, because we all write in ways that we feel comfortable or we understand, or it's using the abilities that we've learned over the years, some things come completely naturally to somebody that are somebody else. It's completely and utterly alien. And it's a real odd thing. And you're going, why are you struggling with that? And then they'll do something and you'll go, oh, how are you doing? That's not normal. We all have these little things. So when we can put it all together, it's great fun.
Yes, I have a song that has an outro that was very natural to me, and I've introduced it. I've had it in my lineup more or less since like 1992. But every drummer that I have half the band, it just always requires way too much practice to nail this thing down. And I'm like, what? Should I just simplify it? Should I just not do this? Is this mean?
It is odd, isn't it, though? It is, because some things you just do. When we were rehearsing for this live show, there's this drum break that I remember Tony Fernandez, who was the drummer with Dad, always used to do this thing where he used to start a roll or a run on the 4th quaver in something. So he'd sort of start off the beat and you'd not quite know where you were unless you'd sort of counted through, but it sounded so wonderful. And it was just something he did naturally. we did it on a track because he played on the Jabberwocky record. So I said to him, could you do that trademark thing that you do? And he was like, what trademark thing? I said, the thing you do where you put a ding, dad, and then you start it off and you've confused the brain as to where you are. And then when we did Adam Cara, the new record, I said to Scott, the drummer, I said, I want this thing where you go, da, dum, da, and you start it like that off where you would normally start. And he was like, okay. And we did it in the studio and it was fine. And then when we came to play it live, everyone in the band was going, where do I join? And I'd be playing going, well, it's here. And they'd go, how do you know it's there? And then they'd look at Scott and say, can you explain it to us? And he would just point at me and go, it's a Wakemanism. He said, I've got no idea. And it just seemed perfectly natural to me. And everybody else found it completely confusing. It's remarkable, really, how the brain works.
So given that this is sort of trying to duplicate a live band experience, throwing in the little samples, the PA announcements, was that just purely a mixing thing? Like, things are slowing down a little. I mean, it really does introducing vocals of any sort. And I think there was one place where it just, maybe I was mishearing, but it just sounded like there was sort of a vocal, ooh, just one place in the whole song.
I think there probably was. That's probably because I remember hearing it in Close to the Edge, the sudden stop and I remember thinking that was quite cool.
Yes. I mean, it really focuses the attention back, perhaps in a way, if you think you might be losing folks.
I think the sample bit was because the song was Mind Over Matter, so I knew it was medical in nature or sort of that sort of science over organic matter healing, that sort of thing. That's where sort of my brain is always between that sort of, there's so many things in life that we don't understand, and we think because science is there, science understands everything, and it doesn't. There's so much stuff in this planet that we don't understand. I like this idea of it being, in my head, it was almost like the song was actually almost like hospital. Someone's going to pass on, they're going to go, and the mind was stronger than the body, and it kept everything going and moved on. So in my head, it was like, okay, it's a hospital sort of area. And I think it was just when we were in the mixing stage, I was heavily into those early Dream Theater records at the time, like Images and Words and Awake. And Kevin Moore, who was the keyboard player at the time before Jordan Rudess joined, he did a lot of this stuff. There was particularly a song called Space Divest, where he had all these voice samples coming in and these little sound effects coming in. And I thought, that's cool. I enjoyed that. And it was like, where can I put those? And it seemed to fit with that song. So it's the same sort of thing. You just get inspired by, some idea that you've heard and think, that's quite cool. I quite like that feel of a discordant voice coming in over music. It can be quite effective if used sparingly.
We haven't yet talked about how you end songs, that the first song ends in this wash of seagull and it's finishing the seaside story. The second one ends dramatically. This one is the first one that actually fades. And it sounds like actually this could have been an 8-minute thing. You're sort of doing the same kind of solo break twice, but it just fades. And then, in fact, let me just play the end of the song here. I mean, is the thought just that since you're bringing these themes back, that it feels like if you fade it, that you're implying that it goes on eternally? That's kind of what I was getting out of that.
Yeah, I think it was. And there was also that element. I don't fade songs very often. But the reason that there was a fade there is because it's still interesting what's going on musically. It's still very fast and your brain is trying to listen to it. And if you listen to the Yes album, there's a track on there called Adventure. And at the end of that, there's a guitar solo, which Steve's doing, and it fades. And so many people that I know have listened to that and sort of gone, why is it faded? That's a great solo. I want to just hear where he goes next. And it fades on that side. And that always made you want to go back to the song again, because it was almost like you're trying to discover something that isn't there anymore, or you're trying to imagine what it would do. And so I think that was probably where that idea came from. And on the new record, actually, there's a track called 1,000 Autumns where there's a big guitar solo at the end. And that was a fade originally. It was a fade with the guitar solo going, which Dave Mark Pierce did a great solo on. And I remember saying to the engineer, Carl, who mixed it all, we'll fade on the solo. So it's just gone just before that last note, because I want that feeling like Adventure where you just want to hear this thing. He said, that solo's great. I said, yeah, it is. He said, you can't fade on that. And Carl's a guitarist as well. So he was like, can't fade on that guitar solo. I was like, well, what do we do then? He said, well, I think you should just write something afterwards. Go back into a verse, but make it a string arrangement and then do a piano part over it. I said, okay, so you want to write this new part to go on the end, and I've got to write a piano part, a piano solo section over it with a string orchestral bit. I said, He said, yeah, that's right. I said, and what happens then? He said, we'll just fade that. It was like,
because that won't be as good.
yeah, it was like, well, thanks, Carl. But he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. It worked so well. But I told the guitarist the story, and he said, I must send Carl a thank you.
To conclude, I wanted to hear some of this lost, but then eventually released material that you'd written for Yes. So To the Moment, sort of the big fat song. You've got some sort of ballads also on there, but this sounds just very Yes-y. Eventually released on From a Page 2019, but recorded, I just saw somewhere between 2008 and 2011. Do you have any inkling?
End of 2010, it was recorded.
Okay.
It was a track that I'd written. It was actually a song about being away on tour, because I had my son is now 18, but at the time he was 3, I think, when I first went out on tour with Yes. So I had that wrench of leaving the family, my wife and my young son, to go away and be on tour. And sometimes you could be on tour for 3 months at a time. And sometimes I would finish a tour with one band and jump on the tour with another band because, you're out working. The idea of the song was all about that pull that people have in families where people have to go away and work. So in my view, it was being a musician, going away and touring and thinking about this child being awake at night, worrying about where you were and wants to know why daddy hasn't come to say goodnight to him. And it's that sort of feeling that a lot of parents, whether it's the mum or the dad that has to go and work, is making a sacrifice for the good of the family. Even if it's something they enjoy doing, there is the sacrifice. There's always a trade-off, whatever you do, when it takes you away from your family. And so that's really where the song came from. And it was something that I was actively living at the time, because I was away for a long period of times, over a 3-year period. I think I was in America for 18 months of it. We were away for a long time. And this song came from that. So lyrically, I had an idea for a story that I wanted to tell. But I also knew that because it was Yes, it would have to have a certain amount of instrumentation to it, because otherwise it wasn't what I thought Yes should be doing. I wanted to help, that happens with bands. Is when new people join bands, there's a new fresh impetus to the band. For example, when Ian Gillan joined Deep Purple after Nick Simper left, they come in, they bring a new identity, the band gets a bit of a refresh, they do something different. I'd say when Benoit and I joined Yes, after Dad and John had left, we brought something new to the band, and maybe we brought a enthusiasm that maybe hadn't been there from 5 people that had worked together over 30 years, as opposed to 2 people coming in that were new. And because it was an opportunity, I knew that I could write and be involved in the band. I was very active in writing lots and lots of ideas for the band for this record. I knew that some of the previous records that Yes had done up to that time had been less musically extravagant as they'd got older. And I wanted to write something that put a bit of that excitement and energy back in, because I was sort of listening to the way that, obviously I've been playing live with the band for a long time. So I was listening to the way that the guitars and the keyboards work together in Siberian Khatru, how those 2 instruments work together. So there was those minor elements in the beginning of To the Moment, which was when we have that riff at the beginning, which I'd written on a Hammond organ. It was like, well, maybe if that's guitar, but then the Hammond takes it up an octave and the 2 instruments work together, and then the guitar carries it going, but then the keyboards bring in unusual chords that go behind it that pull that riff in a different direction. And it was that sort of thing. And there was lots of space for Steve to write, his solos. And then we sort of had these basic arrangements when we recorded it all. And then when I got all the tapes back and I was working on it myself, it was like, actually, I can do some of the things now that we never got time to do in the studio. So I could move the chords around behind what Steve was doing to make it become how I would consider more Yes-like, rather than us just saying, okay, we're going A to D to E here while Steve does a solo. It's like, okay, well, what happens if we go A to B and then we take it down to an F sharp? How do these work with what Steve's playing? And it was sort of how Yes would work if we were all in a room writing together. I was just doing part of that work on my own after the event, but the basics of the songs were all there. And the way that we recorded the songs was great as well, because what we would do, we didn't record it to a click track. And we did, but the click track was only in Alan's ears. So we would all set up in the studio and have everything set up. And we would play through the song with Alan drumming the song. And the only thing that was being recorded was the drums. So our click track was actually Alan's drums for the whole song. So that's how we ended up working the songs, to give it that sort of authentic speed up, slow down that a drummer would do. And I think that's why that record has a certain character to it that actually really captures the spirit of the band at that time, because we were all getting on so well. And there was some really excitement in the studio about the work that we were doing. And so I was sort of so pleased that we managed to get that record out and people got to hear what we did, because we did 4 years of touring. So everybody knew that we were an accomplished and tight touring outfit, because we've been doing it for quite a while. And I remember Chris Squire saying to me once, he said, I don't think there's a Yes song in the repertoire that this lineup couldn't do justice to. And I thought that was great to be included in that part of Yes's history. But, live lineups can change over time, and they're the bits that get forgotten in history. It's the records and the releases where people look at. So it was a bit of a shame that we didn't have anything coming out. And then when the live album came out and we were part of the discography, Memoir and I, it's like, okay, that's okay. And then I was on a little bit of Fly From Here, and it's like, okay, well, I'm sort of there, but it's not really representative of what I was involved in. So it was great to have that record come out where people could actually go, oh, wow, it's that film Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow, where she...
Yes, the alternate history, yes, that where you're the main songwriter. You are the songwriter on 3 of the 4 tunes here, so...
Yeah, it was that sort of thing. And it was that in my head, it's like the sliding doors element of Yes, where it shows the path that the band could have taken and how that would have developed. Who knows? I would like to think that after we'd done that record, we probably would have then done something more long form and maybe something more complicated for half the record, and the other half of the record would have been maybe more accessible stuff, so that we were sort of still pushing boundaries. We had loads of ideas. There was one idea that Chris, Steve and I talked about. We wanted to do, I think it was one of the 4 Seasons, one of the Vivaldi pieces. We wanted to do that in the typical Yes arrangement, like they'd done America and things like that. We had this idea where we were sort of starting to work through that. So even at that stage in their life, there was still this sort of, I like to say, ambition to do something unusual, coupled with a slight element of silliness as well. Why would you do a prog version of Vivaldi's Spring? But it was something that it was just what made the band interesting. It thought about things in a slightly different way.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. It's been really a pleasure listening through your catalog.
No, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's been great.
All right, here it is, To the Moment. Thanks so much to Oliver. This was probably my longest episode, which means Oliver was a great guest that really got into this format. And of course, the songs I chose for him were quite long. That's definitely not the only kind of song that he writes. If you look at the blog post for this episode at nakedlyexaminedmusic.com, you'll see links to some of his other material. The singles for the new album are more concise, and I definitely see a love of 80s power ballads on this new album. Likewise, we really didn't get into his hard rock side, or in any case, more Asia rather than Yes kind of style that is on his Mother's Ruin album and the subsequent, more easily available Oliver Wakeman Band live album. I'll mention that I previously interviewed Clive Nolan, Oliver's collaborator in creating 3 albums worth of prog rock story-driven concept albums that we mentioned. So you can look for my interview with Clive where we discuss some of that work. For more information, please see oliverwakeman.co.uk. I hope that you are subscribed directly to the Nakedly Examined Music feed. Even if you are listening to this on the Partially Examined Life feed, you will tend to get your episodes a bit more quickly. I'd also love you to leave a nice rating or a review if you're up for it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Nakedly Examined Music. You can get all the links for such things at nakedlyexaminedmusic.com. If you enjoyed this, you should definitely check out my interview with Jah Wobble coming out next. And I just recorded one with David Nagler, a really interesting, sharp Brooklyn-based musician. If you listen to my Wesley Stace interview, David has been in his band and co-wrote songs with him. He wrote a whole album setting Carl Sandburg poems to music and another one about Trump cabinet appointees. So please subscribe to the podcast to make sure you hear both those interviews. And if you have suggestions for guests or would like to be a guest yourself, perhaps, feel free to reach out to me, mark@nakedlyexaminedmusic.com. I must, as usual, suggest that you go to patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic, sign up to support this podcast. I want to really thank all the folks who are currently supporting me. You can do this even at a $1 per episode level. You can set a maximum, so it's even only $1 per month if you want. But of course, giving more will help more. So thanks to Richard, Pat, Matthew, Lincoln, Leslie, Frank, Ethan, and Ben, who are current contributors at the $5 or $10 levels. This really helps. And if I could get another 10 or 20 people before we start the new season in September to support at that level, then your support will safely cover the cost of editing these episodes. The revenue from ads has definitely gone down in the past couple of years for podcasts. So while I don't think there's any danger of my not doing this podcast anymore, you've probably noticed I've also moved from a strict 2-week schedule to maybe more like 3 weeks. And it's possible that this will become monthly, not only just because I have 4 podcasts and I don't want to burn out, but because this thing is still barely profitable in itself and definitely owes its existence to our parent podcast, The Partially Examined Life. If you've not heard my other shows, Pretty Much Pop, Philosophy versus Improv, Close Reads, Philosophy with Mark and Wes, and The Partially Examined Life, you can find out about all of those at partiallyexaminedlife.com. Hope you're having a good summer. Hope you're being creative, appreciating great art, or otherwise enjoying yourself in whatever way you choose. Keep on musicking. Until next time, this is Mark Lintonmeyer signing off.